the world, let's chat it up. We're talking competitions, uniforms, and all of the above. It's the Cheer Mom, yes, the Cheer Mom podcast. Cheer Mom, yes, the Cheer Mom podcast. Cheer Moms, your podcast is on.
I read the cutest story or cutest posts in one of the Facebook groups, like the cheer Facebook groups that I have to share. It's the cutest thing ever. So a lot of times on Monday morning, especially, the Facebook groups will be full of posts like, if you were at such and such competition, I found your blah, blah, blah. Or did anyone see blah, blah at this competition? It's my daughter's favorite good luck thing. Or if you were at this competition and you belong to this gym, congrats, your athletes were great. They're all positive for the most part, but this one caught my eye, and it was, if you were at whatever competition it was and you got a pin, and she showed a picture of the pin. She's like, you got a pin that looked like this in what looked like very bad handwriting. I'm so sorry. I can't remember the age of her athlete, but her very young athlete, like 5 or 6 years old, had made these pins by themselves, and she didn't catch what they said. And so the very young athlete was handing out these pins. Well, the pin said, eat the mat. And I just think that's the cutest thing ever, because what they meant was you ate, which is like, you did really good, but eat the mat is different. And everyone was so supportive. And so that is the cutest thing. Now I want a pin that says eat the mat. I personally want a pin that says eat the mat. By the way, if you want to know what the deal is with the pins, with the clothespins, I have a blog post about it, and I will link it in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, you can even see behind me how I have displayed the pins that I have been given. I've got one here that isn't quite fully finished, so I need some more pins to fill it up. I'm thinking that I'm going to make my own Pin Me ribbon to put on Delilah the Rebel Dream bag for the rest of this season so that I can attract more pins, especially that one that says eat the mat. My goodness, I would eat the mat. I do eat the mat. I just think that's the cutest thing. I have a guest on the episode today that I connected with so much. I went way over our time. I think I cut into his next podcast interview that he was doing, and I'm going to have him back because we just barely scratched the surface on what he has to offer. And I'm just so glad that we finally connected. Coach Lain Lee is a personal performance coach, a mental performance coach, everything from how to build a stronger back handspring and reviewing skills virtually to how to train your mind. And he blew my mind with some of the things that he had to say. I don't think I've interjected so much with a guest in an episode of this podcast, maybe ever, but I loved what he had to say, and I love his take on mental blocks. Is it really a mental block? What's the definition of a mental block? The more that I learn about this sport, the more that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that so much of it is a mental game, and that so many athletes, unfortunately, struggle with getting in their heads, struggle with fear, struggle with tumbling blocks and other mental blocks, and they think that they're the only one. And they've tried everything, and they've talked to every expert that they know. And so I'm going to keep bringing these experts in, because you could probably listen to 100 people tell you the same thing, but all it takes is that one to connect with you in a special way. And so hopefully Coach Lain does that for you. Definitely check his website out, coachlain.com. He has lots of videos, some motivational things that he does. His social media is robust and amazing. So I will link his socials, but definitely check him out at coachlain.com. Coach Lain, I cannot wait to have you back. And without further ado, here is our conversation about, is it really a mental block? This episode of the Cheer Mom podcast is brought to you by Apollo Performance Socks. These aren't just any socks. They're a game changer for everyone in the cheer industry. Athletes, coaches, moms, I'm talking everyone. Listen to the rest of the episode to learn more and to find out how you can get 10% off your order of Apollo socks. Oh my gosh, you have a neon sign too? Look at you. What does your neon sign say? I can't see it.
You can't see it because it's blown out. I might turn it down a second. It says the Coach Lain method.
The Coach Lain method. And mine says Cheer Mom.
Cheer Mom,
yours
right?
Is much more, I had mine custom made too, but yours is much more on brand. You're very, gosh, as a branding person myself, I noticed.
Thank you.
The first thing that I noticed about you after I was introduced to you via email was how much I love your branding, Coach Lain.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate it.
We can talk about branding in another episode, but yeah, you did put a lot of thought. Yellow is like my favorite color, and the yellow and the gray, that's like my jam. All the brain places firing off because it's not only aesthetically pleasing, but you have a really great message that we're going to talk about today. So I'm glad to have you. It's interesting, for as much as I see moms asking about mental blocks and wondering, how do I help my child through a mental block? And what do we do? Is this the end of her cheer career? As much as I see that being talked about, I've recently learned that the athletes are not really talking about it. And that makes me think that maybe the coaches aren't talking about it as much, or maybe not in the way that is helpful. Because Samantha Ryan posted a wonderful reel and a TikTok about her struggle with mental blocks. And the response that she got out of that was overwhelming. And just to see people online and in person breaking down. I've seen moms cry. I've seen girls cry over this issue. And to see somebody that they admire and that is so high profile say that really struck a chord with the cheer community. But I'm getting ahead of myself here because anyway, all that to say that I think we cannot talk about this subject enough, and there are a million different ways to make your mind work for you. And so I'm excited to hear about how you approach that in your arena and with the people that you work with. But first, you got me all in my feels. We had a whole
had a preamble.
We had a mini therapy session, almost like a support group talking about personality traits and vulnerability. And so he's already got me like.
But it all comes into play, Kristen. That's the important thing to take away.
It's true. But like we start with everyone, what is your cheer origin story, and how did you become the guy in front of and the founder of the Coach Lain method and that amazing yellow sign?
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm wearing my Coach Lain method shirt as well. I'll try to keep it as succinct as possible because it can ramble.
We can make it a two-parter if we need to.
Okay. We got so much good stuff to get into. But no, I started, honestly, my buddy and I, when I was a freshman in high school, I met this guy who was a junior at the time, and he was a break dancer, a phenomenal, physical athlete. And I always grew up wanting to learn how to tumble. And so we would go after school and mess around, jump off of things, jump onto things. He was teaching me how to tumble, and we were taking a very backyard tumbling approach to learning. And I was going to a small Christian school at the time, so there was only 14 seniors that year. It was a really small school. And
where did you go?
I went in a place called Vacaville, California. I went to Vacaville Christian.
Okay. I'm from Roseville. I went to Capital Christian School.
Oh, that's where my sister graduated from. Yeah.
Okay.
So, the cheer team, which I think there was 7 girls or 8 girls, they saw us one day, and I think that day we were messing around and jumping over each other or doing something. We were big Jackie Chan fans. We were always doing something. And they saw us doing something that looked like a toe touch, and they were like, "Oh my God!" The coach as well were like, "Come over here." And so we did it, and they were like, "Do you guys want to be on the cheer team?" And I was like, "I guess so." But, that's how it started. So I ended up joining the cheer team, and immediately, within the first 2 weeks, fell in love with the athleticism. And I know a lot of people think that's really corny, but I really did. The athleticism of stunting really intrigued me. And as time continued on and I continued my tumbling journey, I would go on to cheer for that school for 2 years. Then my parents started an all-star gym, so I cheered for the all-star gym.
Oh, wow.
And then I coached at that same all-star gym for like the next 8 years. So I was the only one who could teach myself to tumble, but then I was also the only one who could teach others to tumble. So it was very grassroots at first. But as time went on, I realized I like really fell in love with the physics of movement and the physics that goes behind our tumbling, like where it's rooted in the motion and body positions and all that stuff. So that's where the nerdiness started. I did a little bit of cheering for a couple cheer companies and a little bit of college. It was usually just filling in for people that I knew. But yeah, that was pretty much it. I focused mostly on coaching. And then I took a break, became a graphic designer, and spent 10 years building up a graphic design brand. And I remember it like it was yesterday, Kristen. I was sitting here working at my desk, and I was doing like 16-hour days. And I remember even back then my wife was like, "You're here, but you're not here. I don't see you ever." And I was just like constantly working. And I remember it was this beautiful spring day. Sun was shining through the window, and I heard the cheerleaders at the local high school echoing through the neighborhood, practicing after school. And I was like, I'm sitting here like wasting away on the computer. I never interact with anybody. I feel like I'm unhealthy. Like I was having palpitations in my body, just weird things I hadn't have happened before. I was sitting so much. And I was like, I was always told that I had a very unique way of connecting it with the athletes and breaking things down for them. And at the time, my sister, who had also graduated from Capital, was cheering at Jessup. Sorry, not cheering. She was on a track scholarship at Jessup, but she was, right before then, she was cheering at Power. And she was telling me every week about somebody who had a mental block or had fear or got hurt. And around the same time, Will Smith's terrible, awful movie After Earth came out. And there was this scene where it basically the movie was like his love letter to how much he hates fear. And there's a scene in the movie where he has this monologue. He's talking to his son. He's injured inside of a spaceship. His son is on Earth exploring. I'm sorry if that's a spoiler alert. It's been 11 years, guys.
I've never even heard of it, and I thought I've seen every Will Smith movie. So
trust me, you did yourself a favor missing this.
I'll take your word for it.
It was awful. But he has this great monologue, and he's telling his son, fear is not real. Fear is a choice. And what stood out to me about the monologue was the last line. He said, "Now, do not misunderstand me, son. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice." And literally that day that I was describing, I bought CoachLain.com, and I said, I'm going to start coaching again, but I'm not going to coach for a team. I'm going to coach for myself. I'm going to be a consultant. I'm going to use this as an excuse to start traveling more and just meet people. And I want to figure out fear. I want to figure out why athletes are having mental blocks. I want to figure this out and make sense of it. And I said, I don't feel like there's substantial help out there right now. I want to be that help. And so that's how Coach Lain LLC got started. And it's been 11 years. And I am loving every minute of it because every day I am unlocking new passions and new ways of breaking things down, of helping athletes, coaches, and parents around the world outperform anxiety, doubt, fear, and trauma.
And you come highly recommended. There have been several people inside and outside the cheer industry that have been trying to connect us. And when you hear from that many people that you're doing something, really cool and doing something really well. Excited to hear about how you are coaching athletes in this way. And it's interesting, you said you like the physics behind cheerleading and tumbling. And as someone who cried over math homework every single day and hated math, and it was the only class that I didn't get an A in because I just could not wrap my mind around it, it's ironic that when I heard my daughter's coaches explaining tumbling to her in terms of even geometry and physics, that really connected with me.
Yeah.
So, I get it. Like the circles and your feet being under you versus your feet being in front of you. And I was like, that makes perfect sense. And I watched that in some of my favorite tumblers that I watch at competitions now, that, I see, they did it. That's how they did that.
Yeah. And it really helps to like root the fantastical things that we do, the tricks that we watch everybody do, it roots it in reality. Because I think we as humans, like, we're very monkey see, monkey do creatures. So we'll look at stuff like this and just think, oh my God, it's just, I could never imagine doing that. I tell athletes all the time, I'm like, you guys normalize this behavior in cheer practice. But when you go outside, you're not seeing people flip down the street to the post office or grocery store. Like, this is something that is not normal, but we normalize it because it's what we do. It's a part of our sport. It's a part of our everyday goings on. So yeah, I think that's what it does. It brings it back to reality, and it says there's a reason why this works. It's not just chance that you're throwing yourself into the air and hoping that it works. It's rooted in laws of motion that cannot be broken. And so if you learn to manipulate or work within those laws, you can pull off some amazing things. Shout out Liam Patulski, because like, my man is like up there, the upper echelon of tumblers, and the physicality and the watching him move and the physics of his movement just gives you a greater appreciation for being able to tumble in the first place. Yeah.
Shout out to Liam, man. I'm a fan. I'm a fan. This episode of the Cheer Mom podcast is brought to you by Apollo. I've never met a cheer mom who doesn't want to keep their athlete healthy and injury free. We all do. But did you know that common cheerleading injuries like plantar fasciitis and ankle sprains can often be prevented just with having the proper support? That's where Apollo Performance socks come in. I wear them at night. I wear them when I travel, even just lounging around the house. And I know that they are changing the game for cheer athletes at practice and on the competition mat too. Apollo socks can even be a wonderful substitution for bulky leg braces, ankle braces, and even KT tape. And many athletes don't even need to use their heel cups anymore either. The difference in comfort and recovery is incredible. Apollo socks are designed to provide targeted support, reduce inflammation, and help your cheer athletes stay on the mat doing what they love. Visit apolloperformance.com and use code CHEERMOM2024 for 10% off. That's APOLLA performance.com and enter CHEERMOM2024 for 10% off. Okay,
Yeah.
so mental blocks and the human mind, thousands upon thousands of experts have tried to make sense of how the mind works, and we're not going to try to solve those problems. But one theme that keeps coming up for me in this podcast and in life is that you could tell someone something 100 times, or you could hear the same thing from 100 different people, but that 101st person could say the same thing but connect with you in a completely different way. And I was thinking, wow, Will, we've talked about mental blocks before. How can we talk about something new? But then I was like, no, like, you have your own unique way of connecting with athletes. And after even just talking to you, we had a call for a few minutes a couple weeks ago. Talking to you for 5 minutes, I was like, whoa, like, that connects with me in a different way. So
Thank you.
We're going to talk about mental blocks. So when you have athletes or parents come to you with some of these struggles, first, I love that you're acknowledging that this is not normal to be able to do these things with your body, and cheer athletes are doing things with their bodies that the human body is not built to do. So we're already starting up here at this other level. But when you have that initial conversation, how does that go? What are you telling them, or are there questions that you ask them when it comes to the area and how they're struggling?
That's a great question. I like to say that it's different for everybody, but I now that I'm thinking about it, the one thing that I do every single time, I start off just by listening. And it's amazing what comes out when you give people the opportunity and the agency to talk. When you give them space to talk and share their struggle, everything comes out. And so what that does, I jokingly call myself the tumble detective, because that's how I look at what I'm doing. I'm piecing together the information, and I'm not drawing a definitive conclusion. I'm just saying, based on what you've told me, based on what I know, what I've studied, what I've learned, what I've experienced, this is what I think is going on. And even if it's wrong, at least it's somewhat of an explanation to the point where you can then take that and say, I like this part, I don't like this part, or that was interesting, let me follow up with that, let me ask somebody else, get a second opinion. But I listen, and I just give them the room to share their experience and share what they're struggling with and what they're going through. And I'm taking notes the entire time. And then that's when the questions come in. And I've notebooks upon notebooks of notes, and I can tell you that the questions are different all the time. But the two questions that probably come up most often: where did this happen? When did it happen? Or if there isn't any injury involved, then the question is, what was going on in the context of that time, right? Like, what was happening at that time in his or her life? Because I'll tell you this, and we'll backtrack in a second to define what a mental block is, but using the term that everybody's familiar with, mental blocks are never if this then that. They're never caused by one thing. What I refer to, and what a lot of sports psychologists or people in that field that I study, they call performance anxieties, are always an accumulation of events, right? The body and the brain keep a score, a tally board of everything that you experience as a human being. It could be tripping up the stairs. It could be burning yourself on the stove. It could be falling on your back, coming out of a round off back handspring, right? But you are taking note of everything. It could be someone breaking your heart when you ask them to a dance, right? It's everything that we experience. Having your parents divorce at a young age. All of these things are just kept on this imaginary scoreboard. And a performance anxiety is always that last notch or that last tick on that scoreboard where it was too much and it's time to take a break. But yeah, when it comes to sitting down with a parent or an athlete, or usually it's both, it starts every single time with just listening and seeing what they have to say. And then I start to put the puzzle together after I feel like I've got all the pieces laid out before me. For instance, today I was just speaking with a young lady who seems to internalize a lot of what she goes through at cheer practice. And this is my third time speaking with her, so it was really interesting to say, okay, let's dive a little deeper into that. Why do you feel solely responsible when you guys get yelled at or reprimanded by your coaches? Like, why do you feel like you're the only one in the stunt group responsible for the stunt not hitting? Why do you feel guilty that you were removed from your tumbling pass when everybody else also has things that they struggle with? And without giving too much of her information away, but like it has not everything to do with cheer or tumbling or even her coaches. It has a lot to do with a learning disability that she struggles with outside of cheer. And she also internalizes criticism from teachers and friends and parents. And so it's never that one thing that you think it is. And since we're a performance-based sport, most people look to the performance as the problem, right? Oh, she can't do her round off back handspring. I think it's because she fell that one time, or she saw another girl fall. That's usually the only explanation that I hear from parents, and it's so much bigger than that. So yeah, so that's why we usually end up diving deep. We follow as I like to call it, the trail of whys. And what I do differently based on my observation is that I try to look at the holistic picture, the mental, the physical, the emotional, see how they're tying together, because everything that we do as humans is intrinsically intertwined, right? So it really helps to paint as complete of a picture as possible to really begin to help deduce what the problem could be.
It's interesting, the idea, and it makes total sense to me that maybe, yeah, you're going through something traumatic at home and you go to cheer practice and you just don't feel like yourself that day, whether you fell on your tumbling pass or not, and you associate those feelings with your skills, and then down the road you have an issue completing that skill. Or
down the road,
that's super interesting, because it plays into all kinds of psychological, psychiatric, like, we can't live on this earth, like I said before, without having experienced some kind of trauma or been hurt by someone. And it's interesting how I've learned just in the last 10 years or so how our body internalizes those emotions and those feelings. I was talking with somebody about, not to get too heavy, but about a story where a mother had abandoned her baby at birth and the baby was adopted, and in her late 20s, early 30s was just dealing with the trauma of having been abandoned as a baby. And somebody in that story said, your body remembers, even though you were 1 day old, your body remembers that trauma of being abandoned. And I think that is such an interesting thing that we don't talk about enough, know enough about, that absolutely translates into cheerleading and tumbling and completing those things. And not to say that other sports don't, or other athletes don't deal with that in other disciplines. When you're afraid, I think that there's still some level of fear and risk of landing on your feet after a standing tuck. And so how much of that is wrapped up in our personal trauma that we don't even know about? I'm not trying to steal the conversation from you, but it's so interesting to me that we're not looking at it like that. We're looking at bribes and we're looking at goals, and goals are great, but you're looking at it from more of a, like a holistic, like you said, a holistic viewpoint.
It's funny that you bring up the bribes, because a lot of that stuff is mindset training, and that's where mental performance definitely sets itself apart from mindset training. Mindset focuses on the frontal cortex, the conscious brain, right? Where we are processing, logically reasoning a lot of things, and we're making sense of our experiences, our world, our feelings, our emotions, etc. A lot of people focus on the conscious brain because they want to feel like they're in control of something. If I can control my positivity, I can control this problem. The issue with that is that all of these things we've been discussing so far, and the issues that your student athlete or your high performing athlete is struggling with, those are responses, conscious responses to subconscious reactions, right? So when the initial fear sets in, and let's say the fear is just having a startle moment. We all experience what's called a startle response. The first phase of the startle response is the startle. The startle is what kickstarts or jumpstarts the fight or flight response, which is called the active response, right? So the startle is the best example or illustration I can give is somebody jumping out at you from around the corner. So you have a startle, and you see this with a lot of guys, macho guys. They get pissed off afterwards, right? They're mad that they're scared, like they could control that startle. I can't control that.
It's my favorite thing to do to my husband.
And does he get angry? I'm just curious, not to call him
not like rageful at me, but he's like, oh, and he doesn't laugh. He doesn't think it's funny. I think it's hilarious because he is such like a macho, serious guy, and
that's
it
so
does
funny.
not take that much to scare him. And it's talking about liking control. Like, I love that control that I have over him.
We just unlocked a secret obsession.
He's nice to me. He's nice to me when I do it, but no, he is not happy.
And that's like, a lot of people's response to that startle, that they are angry that they felt that, because they misunderstand. They think that the startle is something that can be controlled. It's the perfect illustration for what a lot of the athletes go through. They think that they can control the subconscious reactions. And just having that distinction alone helps a lot of athletes let go of a lot of the pressure that they were feeling in not being able to perform their skills, because there's so many different avenues we can go down. But to try to focus this, let's say we have a girl who says she has a mental block performing her back handspring. So I'll explain where I'm going with this, and then again we'll go back to what a mental block actually is. She says she has a mental block doing her back handspring, and then we start looking at her technique. She has been taught to sit as the first step in going into a back handspring, and there's a reason I stopped teaching sit, because thanks to our semantic memory, right? The words that we use will trigger certain actions, or they will elicit actions that are specific to that word. When we sit, we put our weight in our back muscles, our hips, our hamstrings, our heels. And then we fall, waiting to be caught by whatever we're sitting on, right? We never really think about this. But have you ever had a computer chair or one of those chairs with adjustable height? and somebody came by without you knowing and lowered it. And you are used to sitting in that chair at a certain height. And then you fall back and you're not sat down when you're supposed to be making contact. And in that brief moment, you go, ah, you panic. That's a reaction. That's something we can't control, right? Athletes are doing that going into their back handsprings. They're being taught to sit. And so they put their weight in their heels, their hips, their hamstrings, and they are forced to fall. And they're even hearing the word sit. And they're saying, okay, I have to sit. I do this all the time. And the brain's saying, hey, stupid, there's nothing behind you. And then panic sets in and you have a startle. Okay. So now she has a startle to that sensation. When we have a startle doing anything else in life, we can pretty much find another way to circumvent whatever caused the startle or caused the trauma, like physical trauma. So I used the example earlier of burning yourself on a stove. If you burn yourself on the stovetop cooking, you learn, okay, number one, I'm not going to do that motion again. But number two, maybe I should stop cooking on the back burner and I'll come to the front burner or go over here, right? There's a way you can avoid that action. Athletes don't have that luxury. We have to repeat the action that caused the trauma because that is designed into the movement. So now she's had a startle falling, sitting into her back handspring. Guess how she has to start the back handspring next time, right? She's been taught to sit, so now she has to repeat that motion. And now she's struggling to execute the skill because she has suffered, even for a moment, she suffered a momentary trauma that was never processed because she didn't even understand and couldn't have anybody explain to her that this was something that was forced into the movement and can actually be remedied. So like I stopped teaching sit because bend is more accurate to what we need to achieve. We bend, we load our front muscles now with our thighs, knees, and toes, because that's exactly how we're going to initiate our fall. And then that's how we're going to initiate our stand. We're changing our response to a reaction. I'm still going to have a reaction like I'm falling. My brain's still going to want to step back to save me or even sit back more to save me. But now I'm in control of that fall and I can say, okay, now stand. And I can respond instead of with panic, I can respond with control. So that's like just a quick breakdown of like how these mental blocks will set in. And the startle response is a great way of breaking it down and explaining it because athletes, parents, and coaches don't even know that is something that we react to. And again, because this is a performance-based sport, we're so heavily invested in the performance and the outcome of the performance that we don't take the time to look at the causality and say, okay, why is this happening? A lot of people will do it with more performance, right? Like humans have this, there's a study from a Boston University professor. He was playing Legos with his son one day. And his son was building, he's 3 or 4 years old. He was building an arch and he ran out of a piece to complete the arch. So the arch was sitting like this. And so this dad said, so I turned around, I was looking for another piece. And by the time I turned back around momentarily, he had already fixed it. He took a piece from the other side. And what humans do is what the dad was trying to do. Intrinsically, we will add to fix a problem instead of subtract from it. And so what a lot of coaches do is they'll say, you need more speed, you need more power. You need more effort. You need to believe in yourself. You need to have confidence. All of these things are giving you the illusion that you can control what's going on when the problem started with when you fell out of control to begin with because you didn't realize what could help you to not only maintain control, but also condition your discomfort and your confidence or competence in your technique. I don't remember if I answered your question or not, but I got off on a tangent.
You did. No, you did. And it's really interesting, the visual of cooking on the back burner, because I hope that my expression wasn't too blank when you're talking about the chair metaphor, because I'm all of 5 feet tall, and even on the lowest setting, my feet don't always touch the ground on those chairs. So
now that expression makes so much more sense.
The answer, I was going to totally get us off track, and I wanted you to finish the thought, but yeah, no, the answer to your question is no. I've never experienced somebody coming and lowering it because they can't even like crouch setting down that far, and it's at the lowest setting. But I can totally connect with the cooking on the back burner, because again, my height really prevents me from doing those things. And so that really connected with me, that even like reaching up to put something into the oven is a struggle for me, or getting it out because I am so short. And I was just thinking, as you were talking about relating it to a mental block, is that we as parents or coaches or mentors who are influencing an athlete's life, I pictured me not wanting to cook on the back burner because I know that I'm going to burn myself, and having somebody that I admire, respect, adore next to me going, no, you can do it. Just believe in yourself. I'll give you $50 if you just cook on the back burner. You just have to believe that you can. Okay. If you don't, then you're not going to get dinner.
Perfect
And
example.
again, it's not that the adults in that situation are ill-intentioned, but it does connect with what you're saying, that we don't always have to add to it. And sometimes all it takes, I don't want to negate the fact that all it takes is for the right person to say, Kristen, I believe in you, for
Right.
me to be able to do something. But when we're talking about this kind of, I don't even, like when a true mental block, and I'm going to hold you to giving us that definition next, it's just not as simple as believing in yourself or somebody believing in you, it sounds. So
Yeah.
with that as the backdrop, what is a mental block?
This is not my definition. This is a definition that's been in front of us for decades. It's from the dictionary. And by definition, a mental block is a person's inability to recall mental information or perform a mental action. The word physical is not in that definition for a very specific reason. And that is because our physical learned behaviors, once learned and locked and loaded in there, they never leave us for life. They go to a place called the implicit long-term memory. And you can think about it like this. Explicit long-term memory is what we use. It's a two-way street. It's what we use when we're having discussions, we're talking and learning from each other, or teaching and learning. That's explicit long-term memory. Implicit long-term memory is a one-way street. I always say it's like pulling up an app on your phone and then letting the app run. I have no idea how to program an app. I have no idea how an app runs. But I know that when I press that button, it's going to open and it works. And when it doesn't, I get frustrated, right? Because I don't understand it. Implicit long-term memory is similar to that. It's a one-way street. We are recalling how to do something. It's why we have the saying, Kristen, it's like riding a bike. When somebody says that, you know exactly what they mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's,
Your body knows how to do it.
Your body knows
Yeah.
how to do it. And so it's inaccurate to call our inability to perform, and I shouldn't even say inability, our reluctance to perform a physical skill. It's inaccurate to call it a mental block because we don't forget that information. You'll be 85 years old and still remember how to do a mental block, how to do a back handspring or a back tuck or ride a bike. I ask the athletes who come to me with mental blocks all the time, I say, listen, I have a 3-year-old daughter. Could you teach her how to break down how to do a back handspring for her? And they're always like, yeah. I'm like, so then it's not a mental block, because you're not failing to recall that information or perform the mental action of remembering. So I'm going to give you guys 2 mental blocks. Some of you listening may have heard this from me before, but I'm going to give you 2 everyday mental blocks. You ready, Kristen?
I'm so ready because I'm like, how do
Okay.
I get my feet to do what my mind is telling it if my feet have already done it before? So go, do it, do
Okay,
it.
so here we go. The first is called lethologica, which has a cousin named lethonomia.
It sounds like
This-
a band name.
It does. It's like a 90s like
Lethologica.
grunge band, right?
Okay.
This is when you're telling a story and you forget a word. Or if you're talking about someone, something, and you forget a name of something. That is an actual mental block.
This
That's your failure.
happens often. This happens often to premenopausal women in their 40s.
It happens to everybody.
Every
I'm
day.
so glad you said that.
Every
because
day.
guess what? Motivation culture and the pharmaceutical industry wants to tell you that this is because you're premenopausal or you're getting older. They want to sell you on the idea that there's something wrong with your memory, when in fact, it's just a fact of life. It's just a thing that happens to us when there's a lapse in memory. That's it. It's deja vu. Do you know deja vu happens predominantly in your 20s?
I believe that. I
Yeah.
don't have deja vu anymore because I
Yeah.
can't remember why I walk into the next room. So
And speaking, wow, you are such a great interviewer. Speaking of that, do
I think
you
this is
feel
the
that?
most I've ever talked in an interview, Lain. I apologize.
No, this is great. It's interactive. I love this. So you just said you can't remember why you walked in a room. That's called threshold syndrome or the doorway effect. That is another mental block. And that has a reason behind it. It has a biological, evolutionary reason. Going back to like caveman days or days when we didn't have like security systems and apps on our phone to let us know when somebody's like ringing our doorbell. When you entered a space, albeit as familiar as the back of your hand, but you're entering a new space, your brain wipes your short-term memory clear so that you can take in as much information when entering that space as possible to protect yourself from a possible threat. It's very simple. And think about this too. Most of the doorways that we go through lead into a dark room. The brain does not do well without the eyes. The brain requires the eyes to understand where we're going, how fast we're going, how much space we have to do things in. The brain requires the eyes to make sense of our world and how we navigate through it.
Okay, so back to the nirvana logical.
Nirvana logical.
What are the words?
Lethologica and lethonomia.
Okay.
Okay, and then there's the doorway effect, aka threshold syndrome. Those are both everyday mental blocks that we experience, and they have nothing to do with your mental acuity. It's just there are actual evolutionary biological explanations behind it. They're still researching stuff like lethologica and lethonomia because for a long time, and this is something that goes back to one of the first things that you said that there have been thousands of people who have talked about mental blocks before, and it might just be one more person that takes looking at it differently. I like to think that I'm that person because the issue with lethologica and lethonomia, for a long time, the soft sciences or like the mental sciences looked at that as something that was a precursor to Alzheimer's. And in fact, there's no definitive connection between the two yet, right? And so my problem with talking about mental blocks or talking about mindset training, especially with mental blocks, you look up mental blocks and there is page after page on Google of science journals, of psychology websites, psychologists, sports psychologists, mental performance coaches, mindset coaches. They're all saying the same thing, just in a different way. No one is actually taking the time to say, wait a minute, except for these two guys right here. Let me see if I can grab this book really quick. Dr. David Gran and Dr. Alan Goldberg. This is the only book I've ever read. This is Your Brain on Sports, where they talk like I do. And my sister got this for me for Father's Day 2 years ago. I still haven't finished the book because every page is gold. They are spot on. And
also products of the 90s.
Yes,
That
exactly.
is a 90s commercial reference.
This is Your Brain on Sports. Any questions? Yeah, so that's what I look at as being the problem, is that everybody's saying the same thing with like their own flair. And yes, I'm doing that. I'm doing it in my way, but I'd like to think I'm offering a different perspective, a contrarian approach, and to the understanding of what we suffer from when it comes to mental blocks. So much like the doctors in this book, I've always gravitated toward what a mental block actually is, which they refer to as a repeat sports performance problem, RSPP, or what many sports psychologists claim to call it, which is a performance anxiety. And that means the stress that becomes associated with the thought or physical duty of performing a skill, the stress involved and how the athlete perceives themselves being able to perform that.
It's getting in your head. And short, to oversimplify it, it's getting in your head. And as a team rep for several years, I saw the older girls, especially on levels 4, 5, 6, really getting in their heads and having that anxiety, and never mind all of the social pressures and that formative time of your life. And they would bomb routine after routine when I had seen them do it perfectly in practice. And that's so interesting because conversely, I was observing a youth 1 team, and that was just winning competition after competition and just like crushing it. And I looked at, I was walking with their coaches and I said, what do you attribute their success to besides phenomenal coaching? Like, why is this team so successful? And without missing a beat, without hesitation, the coach said, because they're just here to have fun. We asked them to do something and they go, okay. And they have no baggage tied to it. They have no anxiety tied to it because they're still, 8, 9, 10 years old. And
Right.
so they don't have that sort of anxiety built in from some of those social pressures. And it's interesting, even just last night, I'm somebody who struggles a lot with anxiety and overthinking and getting in my head. And I'm hearing you say these things and it's, yeah, this is just getting in your head. And even just last night, I was debating whether to sit in the hot tub or drink wine and watch a rom-com. And
Man,
my
those
son,
two
I know,
decisions.
yeah. My son saw me in real time arguing with myself. Like my husband just said, what do you want to do? And I was literally arguing with myself about what to do. And my son looks over, he goes, what would help is if you stopped fighting your own ideas. And I was like, oh, that's not half. You should see what goes on inside my head. that you never
Internally,
hear.
man. I would love to
Yes.
have a very
Yes.
existential conversation with him about
Oh,
psychology.
he would love it. He's been able to do that since he was 4 years old. It's getting in your head. So how do we really, it sounds like the fundamental thing that you're teaching is how to get out of our heads. It's not that we can't do it. It's what we believe about what we can do. Is that right?
I'm going to say, in part, yes. I'm going to
Okay.
say it's not so much, and there's a reason I'm making this distinction. It's not so much about getting out of your head, because I think we like that idea because it makes us less uncomfortable. But I think that it's important to recognize that everything we do, the body and brain are always talking. So it's not really about getting out of our head. It's making sense of what's going on in our heads, right? And why, from a biological and psychological standpoint, why we're communicating with ourselves that way. Like even with anxiety, it's important to understand that the core of anxiety is the feeling of being out of control. In some form or fashion, you are trying to maintain control over something that at the end of the day, you really have no control over. It's interesting, even like the battle that you were having last night. There's no, you know what? I can put it to you this way. Think about it in terms of going back to that back handspring that the hypothetical athlete struggled
Yeah.
with.
Sorry, I brought my own
No, this is good because the
rom-com
moms are
baggage
listening.
into it.
No, this is good. The moms are listening, and the moms are struggling with their own anxieties, right? And watching my wife these last 3 years with our daughter, I've learned so much about just how much pressure moms are under. So I know that the anxiety is real. I get it. But let's go to the back handspring. So what I tell athletes a lot, we've been talking about a lot of concepts. We talked about less is more, right? Where we don't add to the problem, we take away from it. I will tell athletes, you don't need more power. You actually need less. I want you to try less. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And then they try less and they're like, oh my God, that felt so much easier. Because with or without your effort, Kristen, with or without your decision, the hot tub still exists. Glass of wine and the rom-com still exist. You can't do anything to control. Only thing you can control is not even your level of enjoyment, is which one you choose. That's all you can control. The back handspring is designed to work already. Whether or not, this is very like quantum physics, but whether or not you do the back handspring, it still exists and it still succeeds at the end of the day. What you do, and I tell athletes all the time, you can't control the skill. You can only control your body as you move throughout the motion. That's the only thing.
But what if I make the wrong choice? I think a lot of people have that anxiety around that and if we're using my example, it's like, what if I make the wrong choice? What if I don't enjoy it at the end? Or in an athlete's case, what if I fall? What if I make the wrong choice with my feet or the wrong choice with my hands? Then I'm going to be hurt or disappointed. So how do they, tell us, how do we
With the skill, I'm learning more and more that I gravitate towards a lot of stoic philosophy. So we remove the idea that there is a choice involved in hand placement, right? Because I've talked to athletes about that before. Stop trying to place your hands. You're still trying to control the skill. Your hands are supposed to be here the entire time. If something is out of place, then we have a reason why it failed, right? We understand what went wrong.
Yes.
There is inherent, going back to that horrible Will Smith quote or movie, he's right. Danger is very real. There is inherent danger in what we do.
Interesting.
Fear is not a choice, though. Fear is biological. Fear is involved in everything we do. It's put in place to let us know when we are in danger or when we are facing a potential danger. So fear is good because it lets us know, especially from a psychological standpoint, right? Because biological fear has to do with us responding to actual clear and present dangers. But psychological
It's
fear,
how we respond to that fear, that's the choice.
there you go. Exactly. So
Yeah.
with
Did I
biological
just
fear,
finish your sentence? I just stole your thunder. I'm so sorry.
no, you're good. That's a great input. That's how we respond.
You said that at the beginning, and I was like, fear is not a choice. Like fear
Right.
is always present. Fear is always there.
present.
It's how we
always
choose to
present.
respond
And so
to it.
think about that with your athletes. Fear is always going to be present. It's how you condition yourself to respond to that fear. That's what makes the difference. And the fallacy is that we let motivation culture convince us that we can think about the words we use, Kristen, when we're talking about our fear. We want to get rid of something, right? Right there. We say we're going to get rid of it. We're going to overcome it. We're going to conquer our fear, right? We're going to destroy our fear. We use all these words of totality. Like you can actually rid yourself of fear. And it's a fallacy. It's something that is not true. Just there's no, well, maybe that. No, it's not true. You cannot destroy fear. But what you can do is condition your response to fear. It's funny because this comes up when I talk about phobias. I'm actually working on, and I don't know how, I guess podcasts like this is a great way to start. I've come up with a term to combat the overuse of the word phobia. We talk about phobias and we're saying, I'm afraid of this thing. I have a fear of this thing. I'm really curious to know, what's your phobia? What's your greatest phobia? Please don't let it be something like my family dying or one of those things.
Like phobia, like I can't think of, I'm sure snakes.
Okay, there you go. I don't know the official
Snakes.
Latin term for it. What is a fear of
Snakeophobia.
snakes called? It's ophidiophobia. Ugh. Even that is just disgusting.
Listen, I have been vulnerable, and listen, guys, I've been vulnerable in this episode.
Please don't
Do
use
not
this against
use
me.
the things that I have said against me, especially this. It is not funny. It's a really good way to be physically harmed and for me to immediately go to jail because I have caused you harm for scaring me with a snake.
This is great.
Not kidding.
This is great. Okay, look at everybody who's watching this, listening. Kristen is visibly shook right now. But is there a snake present? Okay. Are you afraid of, therefore? Now, this is an intricate one because people have phobias of things that can actually cause them danger, right? There are people who are afraid of guns. There are people who are afraid of spiders that could be poisonous. There are people who are afraid of frogs, sharks. Like, those are all biological fears. But the question then becomes, how often on a daily basis, Kristen, are you confronted by a snake?
Almost never.
Okay. Are you more afraid of the actual snake? Sure, there's fear there. I get that. There's a biological fear there. But in this moment, are you more afraid of the actual snake or the thought of how a snake makes you feel?
That's a really complicated question because I was raised evangelical and snakes have like a whole spiritual meaning. No,
But-
you're absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right.
No,
I'm not
that's a
afraid of
great
the snake
point.
itself.
No,
You're absolutely
and
right.
that's a very good point, right? Because then with snakes, you have the spiritual meanings that are attached to it as well, right?
It means the devil's at your door.
Exactly. You have an aversion, a strong discomfort with the idea of a snake. And this is what's wrong with phobias. This is what's wrong with saying mental block. We are giving too much agency to the wrong idea. We are saying, I'm afraid of a back handspring. You're not afraid of the actual back handspring. There is an extreme discomfort somewhere in there that you have an aversion to, and we need to understand what it is. And I'm going to give you guys just a crazy range of examples. I've had athletes where successfully doing their back handspring is what they were afraid of because that meant that they would be expected to repeat that success over and over. I've had athletes who were afraid of failing because failing had all of these implications that they had tied to their ability to do it or not to do it. I've had athletes who are afraid of doing their physical skills, not because they got a concussion falling out of the air once doing it, true story, but that they overheard a friend talking to the owner of the gym about leveling up to an older team, and the owner of the gym said, you're not ready because you're not mature enough. And so they're afraid of failing because they didn't want to show others that they weren't mature enough to handle the pressure. This is why we say it's never one thing. It's always the straw that broke the camel's back because of the extensive pressure that was put on the situation or the skill. And the levels of cortisol that raise in your system for too long of a period of time or too many things bombarding you at the same time that cause what we call a dorsal vagal shutdown. That actually triggers, the brain triggers the body to shut down, because if you continue at this level of stress and anxiety and pressure, you will get hurt. Like something bad will happen, and your brain understands that. And so it's saying she can't continue at this level. We're actually going to shut down and just reset for a second. And then going back to the startle response, that shutdown triggers us as well, and can cause trauma because we don't understand what's going on. So now that unprocessed trauma is living in our body. And like you said at the very beginning, it's aging with us and intensifying and coming out in ugly ways in our 20s and 30s, which is when most traumas are processed, to where we don't understand what went on. And which is why I get comment after comment on TikTok and Instagram of girls in their 20s and 30s saying, I wish someone had told me this when I was younger, because I wouldn't have quit. Yeah.
One thing that I've learned about dealing with anxious thoughts and fear around outcomes, especially that I can't control, I learned from a book that I read that was, so we'll use a tumbling example. Okay, what are you afraid of happening? I'm afraid that I'm going to fall on my rear end. Okay, and then what? It would hurt, or I would get embarrassed, or I could break a bone. Okay, and then what would happen? Let's say the worst and it happened and you broke a bone. Then what would happen? And walking that all the way through, and then would you be okay? Would you be safe after? Then what would go all the way to the worst case scenario, and you find out that you didn't die, but I was okay. Like, it would be really bad if that happened, but I will be okay.
And this is important too, were you uncomfortable with the thought of what could happen? Yes, at the end of that question thread, yeah, actually I'm okay. So what was the problem before? It was thinking about me not being okay and being uncomfortable by those feelings of embarrassment, of failure, of doubt, of worry, of pain, of suffering, right? Of not being loved, of not being paid attention to, everything that makes us human. But discomfort is at the core center of it all. What you just explained is what I referred to earlier. Follow the trail of whys in a very similar fashion.
Okay, got it.
You say, what are you afraid of? How would that happen? That's what I like to ask athletes. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid of falling on my head. How would that happen? I'd stop tucking. Yeah, but in physics, if you begin a motion up here where there's very little friction, unless you're interrupted by something of equal and opposite force, you're going to continue. So for you to fall out of a tuck like a stone, you would never have started tucking to begin with. So you root it in these, again, like these laws of causality that are proving or disproving that doubt wrong right at the jump. But you say, okay, so what, how, and then you say why. And then you keep saying why, right? Until you get to the core.
And that's not easy work. It's simple, but it's not always easy to follow that down.
Do you want to know why it's so difficult for us humans? Out of the 5 cardinal questions, who, what, where, when, and why, who, when, and where are facts every single time. Who, Kristen, where, on this podcast, when, today. Always going to be the facts. But what and why get processed in conjunction with our limbic system. Our limbic system is the grouping of regions of the brain that regulate hormones and help us to make sense of our feelings. So what and why are processed in conjunction with feelings. And so it's always a personal answer, right? What were you thinking when you did that? Why did you wear that shirt today? Why did you fall? It's always like this. It's almost like an accusation is implied with the question why or what. And so we get defensive because it's always a personal choice. What and why is always a personal choice. So we will say, I don't know a lot when you're asking what or why, to distance ourselves from having to answer, or from preventing ourselves from having to be too vulnerable. We'll just distance ourselves by saying, I don't know. The truth is, like you said earlier, we just struggle with being vulnerable. And for me, working with a lot of athletes for the first time, asking them these questions, I have to always ask and be mindful of how I'm asking, because they don't know me and they don't owe me anything. They don't know that I'm going to be gentle with their feelings and their honest thoughts and opinions. They don't know what to expect. So that would be another thing that I'd say for parents and coaches listening. Be very mindful of how you're asking these questions and that you're leaving space for them to answer. And I've had a lot of coaches say, I really believe them when they say, I don't know. And you should, because especially with younger athletes, did you know that feelings, the limbic system, doesn't process time or language? So that's why your feelings, like if you are remembering a trauma today, it was frozen in time back when it happened. And it can feel just as fresh. It can make you cry, make you hurt. It can make you shiver. It can make you feel. We say the phrase like a kid again. There's a reason we say that, because feelings get frozen in time. And it's usually during a time where we have some of our biggest feelings. Again, my daughter's 3. I know all from big feelings right now.
She's got some big feelings, I'm sure.
She got some big feelings right now. And so we remember through feeling. And if I can take a slight digression, but basically revisiting something you said earlier, where you said it's about getting out of your head. The reason that I make that distinction and I say it's actually not, I want you to stay in your head because I want you to understand yourself more. Getting out of your head is easy because it's the less vulnerable option. Staying in your head, remaining present with discomfort, uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And it's interesting too that you said you come from that evangelical background. We're taught, because again, going to the Christian Academy, we're taught that those are sinful. We're taught that they're bad, but it's just part of being human. You know what a sinful thought actually is? You know what I mean? Do you know what that, like to have malice and malicious intent in your mind, that takes a lot more effort. But to have something that goes against your confidence, that goes against your self-esteem, that's just the human brain having a conversation, trying to get you away from what makes you uncomfortable. So staying in your head, staying present with the things that cause you discomfort, that's the real work. That is, I think all these people on TikTok, they're touting these shadow journals, the shadow work journals. That's the shadow work, is like doing the work that no one else is going to see or hear about or truthfully understand, but conditioning, inoculating yourself to the feeling of discomfort by being uncomfortable so often, you're now comfortable being uncomfortable. Yeah.
Wow. I feel like I need to Venmo you for some kind of therapy session.
I appreciate the attention, honestly.
It's interesting. I'm sitting here thinking that as much as we talk about cheer being a performance sport and a perfection sport and an athletic sport, and again, with the doing physically, humanly impossible things
Incredible
in this
feats.
sport while looking good and keeping a smile on our face doing it, I think that maybe we don't get down to just how emotionally connected we are to the sport of cheerleading, to our achievements, how well we do. And it's important. It's an important conversation. As much as to my own cheer mom story, as disconnected as I was as a cheer mom when my daughter was in the thick of cheerleading, I'm like, these are not my people. I don't like it. I'm not part of this world. I sat by myself. When it came down to it, and my husband once made a threat that he was not going to let our daughter cheer the next season or was going to keep her from doing all-star cheer at some point, I looked at him and I said, you're punishing me when you do that too.
Wow.
And that surprised me. And that was almost 10 years ago. That surprised me because I did not realize how much of myself I had, even with really no cheer mom friends at the time, how emotionally wrapped up I had gotten in it. And I think that I can't speak for cheer athletes because I never was one, and I can't speak for my daughter because she's not here and that's her story. But I do have to wonder how much, on the whole, athletes wrap up their identity and their emotions into their achievement, into their tumbling skills, into what their coaches think of them, into what their parents think of them. There's probably people listening going, oh yeah, of course they do. But really, are we like sitting with that feeling? Are we letting them sit with that feeling? Are we having conversations about that feeling?
Right.
Because you can say, I love you no matter what, but we have to let them sit and work through that, because I'm an adult and I'm still having to like I'm going to hang up this podcast. I have another podcast interview, but I'm going to sit down and think about, okay, like, why do I feel this way? Why am I afraid of snakes? Why? And we don't do that enough. I think we don't know enough about it, but it's not a perfect process. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. This is a really enlightening topic. And a lot of what you've said has overlapped with icons like Debbie Love and Jeff Benson, who have talked about the frontal cortex and have talked about some of these same ideas. But are we really sitting with, okay, what am I actually afraid of?
Right.
And are we doing that with our kids?
Well,
Lain,
thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, we need to have you back because we haven't even touched a third of what we had planned to talk about today.
Right.
But in the interim, how can people connect with you, get a hold of you, work with you?
I'm at Coach Lain all over social media, but my primary mode of contact is Instagram. So you can send me a DM, start there, and then I can send you links to booking a discovery call or pointing you in the right direction in terms of what service you're actually looking for.
And do you travel throughout the season? Can we high five you at any events upcoming?
Anytime you see me, I'm always honored when people recognize me or they say, oh my God, I love your videos and I listen to you all the time. Yeah, please high five me, give me a fist bump, stop me, talk to me. Yeah, and then you could also check out my website, my booking website, which is trainwithcoachlain.com. And that's Lain, Lain.
I feel like we're going to need, if you don't do it already, I think we need some kind of group cheer mom coaching from
I would
Coach
love
Lain.
that. I'm not going to take up too much more time, but I was even thinking while you were talking, what association do you think of when you hear the term cheer mom?
Oh, we all, I mean, I think I can speak for most of my audience when we associate that with that cheer mom that's always in everybody's business, that gossips, that is not nice to her kid, but does the whole world starts and ends with her kid. And Mean Girls, I think, is probably what a lot of people associate cheer moms with.
It's taken on a negative connotation for sure. Mm-hmm. But do you have the same associations when you hear the term cheer dad?
No.
Exactly. When I hear the term cheer mom, I think of someone who is extensively passionate. Emotions are wrapped up. And it's just one more thing. It's really important for us to also make the distinction when we're talking to our kids. Emotions are reactive. Feelings are conscious. They're responsive. So make sure you're making that distinction too. If you're asking someone how they're feeling, you're asking them to tell you consciously how they're choosing to respond to an emotion. But if you are asking them, what emotion did you feel? How did you emotionally react in that moment? And humans do this. We use language interchangeably. So don't make that faux pas moving forward of interchanging the terms react and respond. They're very distinct and they're very deliberate. But yeah, when I hear cheer mom, I think of someone who is emotionally reactive, is invested in her child or children in this sport. And just like you said, when your husband made that threat, you took it personally. You had a defensive response to it, or I should say reaction. That was a reaction that you weren't even conscious of. So yeah, I think that there's definitely room for a support group for cheer moms. Let's talk some more about that.
We're going to make that happen. We're going to make something happen, and we're definitely going to have you back.
I appreciate that, Kristen. This has been
when
a blast.
When I say we, I mean me. It's me. I don't know. It's the
it's
we.
Collective,
it's
the
me
royal
and
we.
in my head. It's a royal we. It's a royal we. I will have you back.
It's all of us up here.
Yeah. Me, myself, and I, and
us.
Irene, and us. And, okay.
What up, party people? This is Jason Larkins, host of the Let's Talk Cheer podcast, and I've teamed up with Kristen Wheeler of the Cheer Mom podcast and Dan Cotton of the Cheer Biz podcast.
That's right. Hey, everybody, Kristen here. We know that you love cheer, so why not dive into more perspectives? Tune into my podcast, the Cheer Mom podcast, for cheer issues spoken from the parent's perspective. Then head over to Dan's podcast, the Cheer Biz podcast, to learn from a gym owner on how to run a successful cheer business. And of course, don't miss the Let's Talk Cheer podcast featuring Jason Larkins, the one that we all know and love, where they talk about cheer from a coach's perspective.
Which means whether you're a coach, a cheer parent, or a gym owner, we've got you covered. Find all 3 podcasts on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and stay tuned for new episodes each week.